Welcome to the Wisdom Window on Strong Island Radio. The Wisdom Window is your portal to timeless knowledge and understanding. Join us each episode as Maddi Cheers and Marianne Franzese examine ancient and current wisdom traditions and apply these teachings to today's unique challenges. So let's get started and welcome your hosts, Maddi and Marianne.
Hello, and welcome to the Wisdom Window. I'm Maddi Cheers, and I'm here with my co-host, Marianne Franzese. Hi, Mare.
Hi, Maddi.
Great to be back with you again, and back with Robert Vetter, Bob Vetter, who is a cultural anthropologist and a healer, and also my husband, and who is going to continue our discussion from last week about world wisdom. We left off with Moses Starr, our adopted Cheyenne dad. And so I was going to ask you, what is it about these native cultures here in the Americas that got you so interested that it became your life's work?
It was probably the understanding of who we are, how we relate to the world, and the wisdom as well as the sacred ceremonial ways, all of those things combined. And maybe the foundational story is what I'll share. And it was my first connection was with an elder, Oliver Pattapony, who was the last medicine man of the Comanches. And he's the one that I did most of my field work with when I was doing my ethnographic research while I was at the University of Oklahoma in the 1980s. And his story to me is it has continued to inspire me to this day. It's the story that really kind of sums everything up. So his story, I got to know him, and eventually he adopted me into his family and made me his grandson. The reason that this is so important to me, this particular story, is that it really has to do with the notion of healing. And healing, in my opinion, is at the heart of all of the change that we as human beings do. So on one hand, you could look at healing as something that someone does when they're sick. And that's a very limited understanding of healing. But if you look at healing as becoming whole, then it becomes the whole purpose of why we live in this world as human beings. Why else would we go through all of the difficulties, all of the adversity, and in some cases, all of the misery of this material world, except that we are here to become whole and to maintain our connection, even in the midst of a world that tries to tear us apart. So let me tell you the story and why I think the story is a metaphor for a wider understanding of our place in the world. The way that my grandpa Chief explained the story is, he said, I didn't set out to be a medicine man, but I got sick. The doctors, he said, told me that I had an incurable cancer and that there was nothing left for them to do. He said that they had meetings over my case, and they came in and they said, if you want to stay here in the hospital, we can do everything that we can to ease your pain, but there's nothing left that we can do for you. If you want, you can basically go home to die. So he called in his son and he called in his wife, and he explained to them, there's nothing left for me here. He said, maybe I can try to take care of this the way that our old folks used to do things a long time ago. And what he was talking about was the vision quest. Well, I should say what non-Indians largely call the vision quest. He actually never used that term ever. But he said, take me out there to the hills to fast. Now, the Comanches live in southwestern Oklahoma, and they live near an area called the Wichita Mountains. And the Wichita Mountains is an area that was considered sacred by the Kiowas and the Comanches, a place that has a variety of what I would call places of power, places where medicine is expressed in this world. Now, when Native Americans use the term medicine, they don't use it in the way that we might use it. So medicine describes a mysterious power that is concentrated. It's all over, but it's concentrated in some places more than others, in some people more than others, and in some objects more than others. And the place that he had in mind was a spot where some years before then, a friend of his had gone on his spiritual quest and was healed. So that's what made him want to go to that particular place. So he said when he told his wife and his son that he wanted to do this, his wife said, "You're not man enough to take it." And what she was getting at is that you go on a vision quest for a particular purpose. And in the old days, this was a near universal among the Plains Indians and even found among other tribes all over Turtle Island or North America. But for the Plains people, it was maybe even more important than just about any other group. And almost every boy becoming a man would go on it, and a lot of girls about to become women would go on it. You would go to a place in nature, usually a place that was known to be one of these powerful places, and deprive yourself of food, shelter, companionship, water, everything that we know in our human world that gives us our normal life. And the belief was that if everything about you was right, that you might experience this power, this transcendent great power, in a way that could change and transform your life in one way or another. So for a boy about to become a man, it was to provide him with a sense of direction for the remainder of his life. For someone who wanted to be a medicine person, they might acquire that power. For somebody who was sick, they might be healed of whatever it was that was their affliction. So when my grandma Esther said, "You're not man enough to take it," they're going to run you off. What she was getting at was that there are also powers there that are going to challenge you, that are going to purposely try to scare you away. And that if you leave with the intention of doing this and you somehow don't fulfill the promise that you made, that whatever it is that you went for in the first place, you're never going to get it, whatever it is. So he decided, he said, well, I've got nothing to lose, basically, is what he said. So he had his son take him out to this place facing this mountain. And he said that he had nothing with him but a sheet to cover himself up, an eagle feather to hold on to, and 4 corn shuck cigarettes or smokes. And they use corn husks to roll these prayer smokes. And 4, of course, is a sacred number, like the 4 directions. So he went to that place, and nothing happened for a long, long time. But he said overnight, and he said he was scared when he went there. He was really, really scared. And he went there and nothing happened. Through the day, through the night, he said towards morning, I could hear a rustling of the leaves towards Mount Scott. And it was, by the way, it was also the night of a new moon, so there was no light in the sky at all. Everything was pitch black. He said, when I looked off toward Mount Scott, I could see a flickering of light. And it started to get bigger and bigger. So what it was it was a flame that was moving and moving towards me. And as it got closer, I could recognize a form, and I could see that the flame was the exhalation. Every time he referred to it as the visitor. Every time the visitor exhaled, a flame would come out of its mouth. And he said it was getting closer and closer, and I realized that it was coming for me. And he said, I got to be more and more scared, and I was shaking. He said, I was like, if you take a fish and you pull the fish out on dry land, I was that way. And he said, finally, it got so close to me that everything stopped. He said, my breathing stopped, my heart stopped, everything stopped. And it shot me with that fire. And that was it. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe, I couldn't do anything. But then he said, after a while, the visitor spoke. And he said, the visitor spoke to me in my Comanche language. And he asked me, what are you doing here? And he said, I told him, I'm sick. And the visitor said, there's nothing the matter with you. The visitor said, they sent me to take care of somebody who's real bad off, but you're going to be all right. And he said the visitor started to get ready to go, but then he turned around one last time and he looked at me and he said, son, did you know that this whole world stops for just a very little while at that time right before the sun comes up in the morning? And that's the time when things like me can enter into this world. And he said the visitor took off to the west. And he said, I never saw that visitor again. But a little while later, my son came to get me. And my son ran up to me and he said, Dad, are you all right? How did you make it through the night? And he said, well, where I was at, it was like springtime. And when they got down off that little rise that he had been on, there was a hard frost on the ground everywhere else. And somehow that encounter that he had with the visitor cured him of his cancer. So he never had that cancer again. But whatever it was that entered into him also gave him the power and the ability to heal other people. And he once explained it to me that sickness is like a fire, and you got to fight fire with fire. So when he doctored people, he used fire. He was a coal doctor. And so he would take a red hot coal out of a fire and put it in his mouth to activate his power. And he thought of his whole life from that point on as being dedicated to doctoring other people who were sick. And so whenever I would see him, one of the first things that we would talk about is who he had doctored since the last time I had been there. And I showed up one day. Well, no, let me back up to one other story. He didn't know that it was going to be his job to doctor other people until he was walking down his little town, a street in his little town one day. And an old lady who was a medicine woman saw him and she said, what happened to you? And he said, nothing. She said, no. There's something different about you. What happened to you? And he told her the whole story. And she said to him, you know, you're good for something. She said, you may not know what it is right now, but you're going to find out what that is. And that was when he started to kind of reflect back and think about all of the teachings and all of the things that he had seen in the medicine people when he was from the time that he was a boy. So if you figure he was born around 1900 or the late 1800s, he didn't even know exactly when he was born. He was seeing these medicine men when he was a child who were from way back in the 1800s, doctoring in these old ways. And somehow it all came to him how he was to doctor other people who were sick, to change the suffering that was going on in the people around him. Now, the last few times that I saw him are kind of a sad story, but at the same time, an uplifting story. Saw him one day, and I asked him who he had doctored, and he said, well, I gave up doctoring. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, well, I think that every time I doctor somebody, that it takes something out of me. And I've gotten to the point where I just don't think I have it in me anymore. And then he told me the story about this man who had come to his home, and he stopped. He had the car filled with his wife and his children. And he got out and he walked up to the door and he said, "Are you Oliver Patapony?" And Grandpa Chief said, "Yeah." And he said, I've come with my wife, who the doctors have given up on her. They say there's nothing they can do for her, and she's not going to make it. So I'm asking you if you would doctor her." And he said, "I'd really love to, but honestly, I gave up doctoring, and I'm sorry to tell you this." And the guy left. So I heard that story. And then when I came back the next time, he told me that the man had come back again. And he got out of his car again and he said, "Listen, I know that you told me that you stopped doctoring." He said, "But we've got nowhere else to go. We don't know who else to turn to." And he was in the middle of saying, I understand what you're saying, but like I said, I gave up doctoring. And he said his wife was there and she said, "You heard what that man said. You heard him say that he's got nowhere else to go. You have the responsibility to do what you can for him." And he agreed to doctor that woman. And he died not that long after that. And to me, that story really it gets to the heart of sacrifice.
Mm.
It gets to the heart of what we as human beings are here for. On the one hand, maybe if he had stopped doctoring, he would have lived longer. But on the other hand, the story is an inspiration to all of us to understand our connection and what our own healing is all about, and what our own healing says about our responsibility to other people. That if we really are here to heal, well, it doesn't end with us. That connection demands a concern for other human beings. And it's kind of, if we're talking about world wisdom, it's the same idea as the bodhisattva who has attained nirvana and had the choice of going back into the source of everything that is, but choosing to remain here to end the suffering of others, to be committed to be here in this world until all of humanity has its suffering ended. So that story to me has been so foundational in understanding who I think we are as human beings and how we live in this world and what it means to be connected to something greater than ourselves and the source of life and all of humanity.
And I think it speaks to also, it's such a moving story. I think it speaks to also what comes down to us through the generations in our teachings, but also even in our bodies, in our DNA, in our hearts, in our souls, but our bodies. I mean, we know now that a lot is passed through just being born, and that when somebody like an Oliver Patapony goes on a fasting on the hill, that he comes to that with all those generations of wisdom behind him, not just the ceremony, but within him lives those generations of wisdom. And his wife's wisdom, what I love in that story is, as we know, a lot of Native people, the medicine man is really the medicine couple. There's really that support system there. And there was his wife just there to remind him of, this is what you're facing, or this is what you have committed to. This is your responsibility. So that working together of the couple became what really ends up healing other people, and in the end healed that woman, but meant that he had to make the ultimate sacrifice in order for that to be.
Marianne, you're muted.
There we go. I am. I'm really stunned by that story. I have been transported, Bob. And one of the things that was occurring to me as you took us into that story was, again, going back to who you are, like your original quest that we were talking about earlier. And here you are as a master student in Oklahoma, kind of going again against the grain of the university and immersing yourself with a healer and completely being present for his story. And that here you are, what are we, 30 years later, telling the story as if it was just happening yesterday. And so his story lives on and is so hopeful. And you know, the medicine woman who says to him, "You're good for something, right? You're going to be good for something." I was thinking like, wow, Bob, you are good for something. You are really good for something. And that is that level of listening and then bringing forward the medicine in this transformed way. Still the medicine. Like, I am very highly dosed on that story you told.
Mm-hmm.
That it's even hard to fully find the words, but because there is a reciprocity that's happening, right? Someone has to witness and hold and retell. And like you were saying, Maddi, with the partnership with the wife, like we so need each other to keep the medicine going, to keep the healing going, the wholeness going. So I'm just very, very grateful for this morning.
And it you know, that story also illustrates somebody who found a reason to live.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know, his life was changed through that experience. Not just that, it wasn't just that cancer was gone.
Right.
It was the real embodiment of a hero's journey.
Mm.
And bringing the medicine back to the people.
Exactly.
So true.
Mm.
So that story, you know, that I've been around a lot of people since then. I've been around a lot of different Native contexts and stories and ceremonies and all kinds of other things. It always comes back to that story for me, though.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so wonderful that you shared it with us, because it is a story, a universal story with universal truths, and it did not happen that long ago. You know, it reminds us of, and me in particular, of the ongoing nature of our individual stories, that when we tell our stories, we see the wisdom in it. We find the healing in each other. And that these great and mystical experiences that get written about and are very, very famous and well known are no more or less powerful than the experiences of any one of us. And the fact that he was so willing to share the story completely and so humbly, he not making himself out to be some big guru or like he made all the right choices, or the fact that he was so humble about it, to include the whole story with his wife and the man coming back twice and his being scared, even that, you know, when we go down that path that takes us away from the known, we are all scared. That's a universal, and it's that courage that makes us the hero, like you said, Bob, in the hero's journey.
And the irony of the story also, because Marianne, you mentioned the context of me at the university at the time. The part of the story that I didn't tell was how I didn't fit in the university department, which was largely a Marxist had a Marxist theoretical orientation. And for those listeners who don't know, that Marxism is founded on the notion of materialism, that there is no such thing as spirit, that the only reality is matter. That's what Marxist theory is based on. And so here I am believing in spirit.
Right.
Here I am. There's a disparaging way of describing people like me, of going native. Going native is when you lose your objectivity to get so absorbed in a culture and a community that you're no longer an objective observer. So guilty as charged.
Right. And now we know from quantum physics that none of us is an objective observer. There's no such thing. So that's an important thing to know, because we all bring ourselves to whatever it is that we are observing. And the beauty of being told a story like that through the eyes of somebody who loved this man and loved this story brings it great power.
And that's the whole thing. It is the observant through the eyes of the heart, listening through the ear of the heart, which is very, very different than breaking this process down of even changing the name to the vision quest, like it becoming something of a material nature that we can replicate. Like this, you know, the nature of the love that was exchanged is still as present all these years later. Like that's the beauty of the heart, right? That's the wisdom of the heart.
Right.
Really, so powerful. So beautiful. Wow. That is a podcast, Bob.
Yes, it is. Right there. So I think we are going to close right now. Bob, if you want to give us your contact information, please.
Sure. So in the very, very near future, you'll be able to find me at bobvetter.com. BOBVETTER. In the meantime, by email at bobv1111@aol.com.
Wonderful.
For information on classes, programs, one-on-one healing work, et cetera, et cetera.
Terrific. Wonderful. So once again, thank you, Mayor.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Marianne. Thanks, Maddi. Always a pleasure being here with you.
Always a pleasure having you here with us. And we hope you'll come back again, because there certainly is a lot more to explore in world wisdom.
There's a drop.
That was exactly the drop in the ocean.
Right. So to get in touch with us, with me or Marianne, the easy way is Maddi, Maddi, at womensoneness.com. And you can just send us an email and
Sorry.
okay. It's modern times. Addressed to whoever, whichever one of us you have. If you have a question or a comment, please leave it. We'd love to hear from you and love to answer your questions and read your comments on the air. So again, thank you, Bobby Lacera. Thank you, Strong Island Entertainment. And we'll see you all next week. Take care. Wishing you peace and love and unity and your own path to wisdom. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.